Hey everyone, this is Coloring Chemist. My name is Connie, and welcome back to my channel. I don't know quite what to call this video. It's basically we're going to be talking about color and some coloring tips, I guess, that I have sort of discovered throughout my time coloring that you might find helpful. You may not, that's okay too. But I thought I wanted to put them kind of all together into one video to share with you guys. And I know I say this numerous times throughout the video. I just want to say it right up here at the beginning of the video. The stuff that I'm talking about in this video probably, most definitely, sort of relates more to beginning colorists, not to experienced colorists or artists or those with artist training, because the tips just probably simply wouldn't make sense for those folks. I'm just more aiming this at, folks that are starting in their coloring journey or maybe a little bit into their coloring journey and they're struggling with color. That's who this video is aimed at. And I'm going to start off this video with a statement that could be controversial. And if you disagree with it, that is totally fine. You are welcome to, join in the comments and nicely, kindly let me know why you disagree. But here it is. I am going to say, for me, I have found, and I think this may be true particularly for a lot of colorists who maybe are just starting out or who, I hesitate, I don't know. I want to say hobby colorists because that's what I think I am. I am not a professional colorist. I do not hire my services out to do coloration for, line work in children's books or anything like that. I'm a hobby colorist, right? For non-professional colorists, and I don't know, I can't really speak for professional colorists because I'm not one. Here's my statement. I think that color choice and color balance is more important than shading. And you may agree with that, you may not, but I'm going to talk about why I think that is. We often worry about shadows and highlights and shading and where to put the shading and, all of those things. But I'm going to say I don't know that it matters as much as sometimes we worry it does. I think color choice is actually, and color balance is more important. I think you can have the most detailed and wonderful and best shading and shadows and highlights in the world, but if your color choice and your color balance is off, I think it almost negates all that work that you did on the shading and the highlights. So that's, again, just my thoughts, but I think that's maybe something we should consider. Let's talk about color choice first. This is, I just printed these off of a website. It was just they're all over, these kinds of things are all over the internet. You've got primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. And I know color theory can get really complicated, and I'm just, trying to simplify it down because you've got digital colors, you've got light colors versus pigment colors. Light is in light, light, energy. But this is just sort of the basic, if we're talking about paint colors. Your primary colors are blue, red, and yellow. If you mix blue and yellow, you get green. If you mix blue and red, you get purple. And if you mix yellow and red, you get orange. Now, tertiary colors are, they sort of fall between. So you can see if I were to able to overlay this, and this, we'd get a continuous circle, right? And we get, where is we get this continuous circle, all right? So if yellow is there, actually theirs is opposite, mine has red and blue. Would it be Nope. So there is your primary, there's your secondary, there's your tertiary. Now, the sort of traditional color theory definition of a tertiary color is an even mixture between two secondary colors. Basically, so it's a mixture of three primary colors in a 1 to 2 to 1 proportion. It's not vital that you sort of get where that's going. There's a more recent definition where they're talking about an even mixing of a primary and a secondary, but just sort of, it's enough for us to understand your primaries are at sort of 3 points on this wheel. The secondaries come from mixing primaries, and the tertiary colors fall in between a primary and a secondary. So there's yellow, that's a primary color, green is secondary, yellow-green is tertiary. Oh, sorry, that's really glaring. Green is a secondary, blue is a primary, blue-green is tertiary. So going around this wheel, it always goes primary, tertiary, secondary, tertiary, primary, tertiary, secondary, tertiary, primary, tertiary, secondary, tertiary, primary. There are tons of great videos on choosing colors. Jennifer Stay over at Coloring Bliss, Jennifer and Steve, have put together an amazing resource where they have, and I think I even have a print copy of it. It's their color picker resource, and they talk about putting together, they've got like a color wheel you can cut out and you can use to sort of choose your own color schemes. They've got color schemes, those are tritone sets, but they have color schemes where, you know, if you want a color scheme that involves yellow-green, for instance, they've got all of these color schemes printed out, all of which come from these color schemes on the back of most color wheels. So we've got all these great resources for choosing color. You've got the color cubes, Sarah Renee Clark. I have the cubes, but I actually have printed out the color palettes because I took, before the cubes existed, I took the digital version that I purchased and I printed it out, which, yeah, was a lot of printering, but this was before the cubes existed, and I just really wanted a physical copy. So here we've got more color palettes to choose from. So sometimes, and I mean, you can, if you don't want to pay for these, if you just go onto Pinterest and type in color palette yellow green, I mean, probably hundreds of them will come up. So I think sometimes it's not so much, we're almost spoiled for choice when it comes to suggested color palettes. But yet so often, for myself, and I know I see other people commenting as well, we struggle with making our coloring pictures look the way we want them to. And I used to think maybe it was because I wasn't doing enough shading, and that's, I mean, it's possible I'm still not getting my darks dark enough and my lights light enough. But more and more, I'm starting to think it's not so much the shading, it's my color choices. So I want to talk about just some tips that I've sort of developed over the time I've been coloring that I'm trying to adhere to more, and I'm hoping are going to make my coloring sort of move in a direction that I want it to move in. I will say this, and we're going to look at some of my past colorings here. We're going to look at, what I think I've done right, what I think I've done wrong, and sort of develop some points. And I'll try and list all the points down in the description box below so you can easily kind of reference them. Some folks, some very lucky folks, I think are born with an artist's eye. Now, I know maybe that's probably got some hackles up somewhere. I'm not saying that we can't all learn to do lovely art. I think that's possible. I think it's possible for anyone to learn. And I say that as a teacher. Particularly, I teach a subject that the vast majority of people do not have fond memories of. I teach chemistry. And inevitably, when I tell people that I'm a chemistry teacher, almost one of the first things that I'm told is, I hated chemistry in high school. And that makes me sad because I truly do think anyone can learn chemistry. Once upon a time, I had a student. I've taught chemistry at the high school level, I've taught it at the college level, and I happened to be teaching a chemistry course it was a pre-health chemistry course. It was basically a chemistry course for students who wanted to go into health-related degrees at university or in college, like nursing and those kinds of things, but who had, say, graduated high school and didn't have the chemistry prerequisite for nursing or paramedic or those sorts of things. So they would take this pre-health chemistry at college and then could go on to do their, apply to get into their health program. And this very lovely girl wanted to become a nurse. And she had attempted pre-health chemistry with some other instructors, I think 2 or 3 times, and it just was not successful. And so she got into my class and was doing it with me, and I was doing some one-on-one tutoring with her. And I remember saying to her, because she's an amazing person, lovely, lovely, lovely person. She is now a nurse. She makes a wonderful nurse. She's got an incredible eye for fashion, and detail, and color, and those sorts of things. Probably would have made an incredible artist, but she wanted to be a nurse. And I said to her, and I didn't say it to be discouraging. I said, some folks genetically have an advantage when it comes to, say, math and science. Just like some folks genetically, I think, have an advantage when it comes to artistic endeavors. Some folks have an athletic advantage, Everyone is born with different gifts. And you can do something or try and learn something that maybe doesn't fall into your particular range of gifts. It's just going to mean that you have to work harder. So I said to this girl, I said, I'm not saying you can't be a nurse. I totally think you can. But you're going to have to work harder at it than someone who just naturally has a math science brain. And she was thankful. She said she'd never had anyone sort of say that to her before. It was always just like, aim for your dreams, you can do it. But the thing is, some of us just have to work harder at certain areas. I have to work really hard at understanding and trying to see and think like an artist. And I have lovely friends, and it just comes naturally to them. So, I will say choosing colors can be hard, and some people just have a knack for it. Some people just choose the colors and they color their page and it looks amazing. And other people like me have to think about it and backtrack, and sometimes I use acrylic paint and I cover up a color that I chose because I put it down and I think, oh, that's not going to work. So yeah, just know that if you don't have that artist eye, you can absolutely, maybe use some of my tips that I'm going to talk about in this video to help you. And all of those other amazing resources like the Jennifer Stay Quick Color Picker, the Sarah Renee Clark Color Cubes, just finding palettes on Pinterest, all of those things are going to help. But to develop your artist eye, if you weren't born with one, and I think even if you were, you have to just try stuff. You can't be afraid to mess up. I think that's maybe one of the the biggest thing that I've learned. You can't be afraid to mess up. You just have to try. And that means that there's going to be coloring pages in your books that don't look good. We're going to see some of those in a minute. So, one of my first tips is that, so we've got our primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. Bright, saturated, primary colors are for me much harder to control and balance than, say, even secondary colors can be hard. If you're unsure about color choices, tertiary colors are going to be your friend. And I'm going to show you an example here. So if I get, this is some old coloring that I did. I hesitate to even show it, but I will for educational purposes. Where am I looking here? This is, I think, the first adult coloring book that I ever got. And this is pretty much almost the first page that I did in here. Now, some of you may look at this and think, that's great, that's awesome, it's very bright. But I just wanted to pull it out as an example of bright, saturated colors and how lots of different bright, saturated colors, there's nowhere for your eye to rest. And I think that's important when you're, and again, all of these are just my opinion. If that's not the art style that you're into and you want just, a lot of color and just color and movement and everything everywhere, you go for it. Go for it. But this is just what I've found, what has sort of helped me to continue to sort of develop my coloring style. There's a lot of small elements on here, right? We've got all these flowers all over the place. And because this was one of the very first pictures that I colored, I pretty much, well, not totally, but I made lots of different flowers, lots of different colors. And there's a lot of bright colors going on. We've got some bright oranges and some bright pinks and some red, some more orange. The blues were a little bit more muted, although I did get some brighter blues kind of in here. We've got some purples. There's some more, a slightly peachier pink, which isn't the same as that pink. Some bright yellow oranges. Some peaches. I mean, there's just a lot going on in here. And it's a lot harder to get balance, to control, and to have a picture look cohesive when you've got a ton of bright colors everywhere and a lot of them. So if you're going to use bright colors, I would suggest just using one or two bright colors and just trying to use maybe varying pressures of those colors. So a slightly lighter version, a slightly darker version on different areas of the page. Not even worrying about shading, but just, but not, and again, this is just me. You could totally disagree with me on this. And I think the more experienced you are, the better artistic eye you have, you can take these tips that I'm telling you guys about and toss them out the window, right? I've seen some amazing coloring on YouTube from some lovely colorists in the community where, I mean, it's just bright colors everywhere, and they do a fantastic job in balancing it, in keeping it cohesive. But as a beginner or even an intermediate hobby colorist, I think that's tough. So this to me is an example of just, it's too many bright colors. There's no cohesion here. It's just, your eye doesn't know where to go, right? Here, I think, is maybe a better example. So here I've got basically two pops of bright color. There's one there and one there. And the rest of it is, it's more, I kept the same, basically two-ish, well, if you want to call white color, we'll get to that, talk about white in a sec here. But I've got some purple, right? And it's the same purple. And then I've got some blue, a little bit darker here, a little bit lighter in some areas, kind of mixes of dark and light. And then I've got some white flowers. But the rest of it, it wasn't like this color or this flower is a certain color and this one's a different color and these are different and these are different, right? And so the sort of two tips that I've got going on here. Keeping the same colors over multiple elements, and just, there's a pop of bright there and a pop of bright there. Your eye probably firstly maybe goes there, and then starts to look at this. But it gives your eye somewhere to rest, right? Without being totally overwhelmed. Do you see what I'm getting at there? So bright saturated colors, when you're first starting out, maybe just one or two small areas. And the rest maybe paler, more muted colors. Another example in here. Here I've got not really brighter colors, but I've got a little pop of orange there. There's some yellow in the centers of the flowers, but the rest was, again, you know, I chose certain pinks and certain purples, and that's what everything else, you know, turned out to be. Here's another one. I decided to make the background a little bit more colorful, but the flowers are basically all the same color. Slight variations, and I chose really earthy muted tones. It's an orange, but it's not orange. You know what I mean? It's not this orange. It was a more of an ochre orange. In fact, I think it was terracotta in the pit pens. And then I think that's maybe some of the green gold. So it's more earthy colors. But again, because the background was brighter colors, not bright, but brighter colors, I didn't make, you know, this flower one color and this one's another color and this one's another color. I didn't. And I made some of the flowers white, just again, so your eye kind of, it can rest on the flowers as a whole, right? It's not jumping from flower to flower to flower because they're all different colors and it doesn't know where to look. This is an example of, I think, what not to do. And this was early on in my coloring again. So I've got, I think every flower on here is a different color. You know, almost. I mean, maybe these two are similar colors, but I've got, you know, I've got a peachy pink, and then I've got a redder pink, and then I've got a blue violet, and then more of a red violet, and then I've got like a yellow orange, and yellow orange up there as well, and then some grayer purples in there. And your eye doesn't know where to go. Now, I don't think this is as bad as that, right? Just because, I mean, there's this big, you know, empty space in the middle. But what if I do that? Isn't that nicer to look at? I've got less colors going on, right? Your eye has two bright spots to go to, and the rest kind of, you know, are fading in. But you put that in, and it just doesn't balance anymore, right? I shouldn't have had extra colors down here. I should have repeated some of these colors down here. Does that make sense? I hope I'm making sense. And you know what? I'm a chemistry teacher. I'm not an art teacher. I have not studied art. These are just things that I have sort of found for myself over the years. This was very early on too. I decided I was going to just take each of these little circles on this page and just try something different. Which, I mean, you know what? If that's what you want to do with a page, that's totally okay. In this case, I have a lot of very muted things going on. Like, these are all kind of muted, more grayed out tones. Kind of muted. I mean, this literally is black and white, so is this one. Muted, kind of olivey. And then all of a sudden I've thrown in like orange, bright orange. And then right below, these two in particular do not work together. And I think it's maybe the undertones in the color that I've used. But here I've got these odd pastel colors against some brighter colors here. It just doesn't work. This one doesn't work down here. These colors I've got in the center. Again, I think with a page like this that has, I mean, there's 16 little circles here. If I wanted this to be cohesive, I probably should have used similar colors with maybe different shades of the color on different areas. I think that would have worked better. Here's another example of what I don't think, what doesn't work. I've got sort of very muted kind of tertiary colors out here. You'd think this would work. I don't know if the camera is doing this justice. This is quite bright pink. And again, I was starting to understand, like I wanted a pop of something different. But I think maybe I should have done it in the butterfly, and I should have made that brighter. Because watch. So looking at this, there's just something not right about it. If I do that, to me, that looks much better. Right? If I cover up that pink flower, I do have little bits of pink out here. That's okay. But I've got orange and kind of peachy colors in here. I've got a really pale pink in here, paler pink up in here. That works. But the minute we put that in, it's just jarring. So this is kind of getting, so the first point that I was making, that the bright saturated colors are harder to control. By control, what I mean is keep the picture looking balanced. Keep the picture looking so that you look at it and think, yeah, that works. That's kind of what I mean by balanced. And hand in hand with that is the more colors you use, the harder it's going to be to balance. So like this one back here, not only do I have lots of bright colors, not only do I have bright colors, which are hard to, get that balance, I have a lot of them. And so those two things, breaking two of my own rules there that I've sort of developed since then. If you're going to have bright colors, just a little pop of it. And particularly if you're going to use bright colors, don't use a lot of them. There's even some commonality between these two pops, right? Here I've got my little monarch butterfly, which has some orange in it, but it's got some yellow orange. And then I've got kind of almost a yellowy, it's a yellow, but it kind of leans a bit yellowy orange here, right? And so, yeah, too many colors, too hard to control. Really bright colors can be hard to control, particularly when you're starting out. This is actually a picture that I really like. And I did this a couple of years ago. There are a ton of elements on these two pages, right? Little tiny elements. And if you guys have been watching my channel, you know I love coloring little tiny detail elements. And what I've discovered over the time that I've been coloring those little tiny detailed elements, you really, really need to limit your color palette if you've got a ton of little tiny elements. Because again, lots of tiny elements with lots of colors, particularly if they're lots of bright colors, it becomes overwhelming to look at. Your eye doesn't know where to rest. It doesn't know where to stop. It just keeps flitting from place to place to place. And I find it hard to look at, for me. So when I was coloring this, I made the choice that all of the flowers, even though they were going to be kind of, there's some bright pink up in here, but all of the flowers were either going to be kind of a pinky purple or a purple. Right? There wasn't going to be, there's a tiny little sunflower here, but all of the rest of the flowers, wherever they are, there's some white flowers there, were either purple or pinky purple. And all of the pots, little clay pots, I was going to color them like they were terracotta clay pots, or I was going to make them warm gray. And we'll talk, that's another tip that I've got too. It's funny, of all of this, the part that I don't like is that square right there. Because I had all of these, pinks and purples, and then earth tones. There's some wood, right? So there's some browns, greens, and for whatever reason, I decided I was going to make those little things rainbows down here, or little partial rainbows. And I introduced this red, and I don't think it works. If I cover that up, to me that looks much, much better. It's together, it's cohesive. To me, that looks jarring. Cover it up, better. But again, that's just sort of, my opinion. There's another, if I can find it. So yeah, this I thought was a really good book to look at to start with, because I've had it the longest. And so there's examples of my coloring in here that are older, but that are also newer. This is newer, and I did choose a really bright orange for some of the elements in here. Orange to me is one of the hardest colors to color with. And I've done some really terrible things with orange. some things that I really regret. But in this one, I knew that if I was going to do little bits of orange, and it's not an earthy orange either, it's like orange, the rest of it needed to be pretty muted and pretty monotone. Because if you start introducing too many other colors in with particularly other warm colors. Now, if I go back to, where's my color wheel? If you imagine, so we've got yellow here, right? And then imagine drawing a line. So we've got violet, blue, green, right? Around here. These are your cool colors, right? These are your warm colors. Your reds, your oranges, your yellows. Warm, think fire, right? Green, blue, think water, cool. Orange is definitely a warm color. I find it so hard, and red too, to start bringing in other warm colors and to get it to look good. I find it quickly gets out of control, and again, it's too many bright colors. My eye doesn't know what to do. I think cool colors are more restful to the eye. I could be wrong in that. They seem to be for me. So by making some of these violet and blue, the background is blue. I do have some yellow-green in here, but even that's a coolish color. Right? Everything else, little bits of yellow in the middles of the flowers, but cool, and then these pops of oranges, I think works. Whereas if I had tried to make, these orange flowers and then other ones red and other ones yellow, I've seen it done amazingly by a lot of colorists on YouTube. I can't. I just don't have that skill level. Maybe someday, but not right now. Let me... Oh. Nope, not that one. This is a page I colored... Was it last year? Last year, the year before? I can't remember. I think it was definitely before I started my channel. And it's in the Fall Walk book by Rita Berman. If I cover that side of the page, I think that looks okay. If I cover that side of the page, I think that looks okay. If I cover that in the bottom, then I think this all works. But it doesn't work when I introduce that. And I honestly think it's the fault of this orangey red. The fault was mine. But if I want to blame a color on there, it's that orangey red. Because again, it's really hard to get orange or red or orangey red, the bright primary, not so much the muted earth tone versions of that, like terracotta or like a raw sienna, right, or an ochre. Those are earthier versions of red and orange. Those are easier. And I've got some of those, right? Out in here. Those are easier to get to balance and, you know, but the minute you introduce like these primary bright oranges and reds and yellows, it just gets really tough. It's tough to have a picture stay cohesive and balanced and not have an element on that picture that's jarring. To me, that's jarring. That's better. Again, just my thoughts. Now, here we've got, that's really hard to see because it's all glitter gel pen. Tilt it a bit. This is oranges and browns and reds, but they're earthier versions. So, and I haven't introduced any other colors on here. So I think that's why this tends to work. There's another picture where summer one in here. That doesn't work. Why doesn't that work? Honestly, I think it's the strawberry. If I were to cover that, I think that works. Again, it's that primary red. And then I used like not a yellow, it is a little bit of a yellowy green, but it's more of a primary, it leans closer to primary green than yellow green. This is more olivey down here. Those primary colors, I think are, sorry, I'm just going to turn my phone off there. Those primary colors are just, they're more difficult to work in there and get to balance. This, I think, is too many colors. I think I should have, well, I think these roses are they're too pinky versus the flowers I've got going on down here. And I've got multiple different purples going on in here. I probably should have stuck to just one. And again, I have this orange terracotta pot, which would have been okay had I not had so many other colors going on. I think this would have been better had I made this pot this warm gray. So that leads into another tip that I have. And I'm sorry if this seems really scattered. I don't mean for it to be. It was just something I've been thinking about, and I just wanted to just sort of talk with you guys. This is something I colored this past Christmas, so Christmas 2023. And it was a freebie by Rita Berman, and so I printed it off on just mixed media paper. And I taped it down to just a cheap disposable cutting board, and I used gel crayon and a brush to do this background. So we've got our kind of sunset colors, kind of yellow and orange fading into blue, kind of a dark, kind of really stormy muted blue. And once I'd done that, I thought, okay, now I'm going to color this image. And here's where I really sort of solidified this tip in my head, because I knew my snowman was going to be white because I was going to make a white snowman. And then the branches here were going to be brown. But then you've got, and you got a Christmas tree, so that was going to be green. And then some holly leaves, those are going to be green too. But you've got the snowman's scarf, and then you've got these different presents down here. Now, I could have made those presents different colors. And I colored the bows. I wanted the bows red. So and it's again, it's a very muted kind of almost gray red, if that makes sense. It's not like a bright primary red. But once I had done that, I thought, what color am I going to make those presents? I already have like a yellow and a peach, and then kind of a pale kind of violet, and it's going into blue. You know, I've got some greens. What other color can I bring in? And I thought, and I thought, and I thought. And I finally thought to myself, I don't know. I don't know what color I can bring in, because if I bring in another color like pink or purple or orange or any of it, wasn't going to work. So I'm like, well, what color am I going to make these presents? And so I eventually decided on warm gray. And so that's another tip. Talking about, not having too many colors, trying to limit your palette just when you're starting out, because it's just gonna, I think, make things less frustrating for you. But sometimes you've got elements on your page that need another color. But you're trying to limit your palette because you're trying to help, to make things more cohesive, but you need another color. Choose gray. Gray, particularly warm gray or French gray, I think can make a really good color to include in a picture. So I made these presents. It was actually a warm gray Pitt pen. And I think it works really well. The candle wax is the same warm gray. This little box is the warm gray. I even alternated, because the presents had these red bows, and then like craft paper, right? Simple wrapping. So I made the snowman scarf alternating red and this warm gray. So I think gray, whether it be warm gray, French gray, even cool gray, can be a really great addition if you just need something to make some element a different color, but you don't want to introduce another color. So yeah, I was really proud of this. I thought this turned out really well. So that's another tip. So this isn't the greatest picture, and I think if I cover that, to me that looks better. Or if I cover that looks okay. I think the pink and the orange are clashing. They're fighting one another. But I think it would have made it magnitudes worse if the green that I had chosen to put down here had not been a muted yellow green. If you look outside in nature, and I have my desk situated so I'm basically looking out a window all the time. And so, I see the seasons change here in central Canada. There's not, in my neck of the woods, the greens that I see are virtually always yellow greens outside. For me, I rarely ever see any foliage or anything else that is kind of in, these are my swatch cards for my Pitt pens. So here we've got kind of that true green color range, right, in here. But you rarely ever see, in my neck of the woods anyway, foliage that's that color. Foliage is almost always, and even up in here, that's tough. Foliage is almost always in here. So I've found if I have a page and I've got a lot of kind of colors going, and it's kind of, it's feeling like it's veering maybe out of control, I will pick some really muted yellow-green and pull it in there. Now, granted, a lot of the things I color have foliage on them. I tend to color a lot of natural stuff. But even stuff that isn't nature, right? You can make it yellow-green. But pulling and putting some yellow-green on the picture can often kind of save it for me. Whereas, I don't know if you can picture in your mind's eye, if I had done sort of this fox, his orangey colors, and all these pink, cherry blossoms that I put up here. If I had chosen, say, a true green down here, I don't think that would have worked. I don't think I could have pulled it off. So the muted yellowy greens, I think they do help. So again, if you're you're looking at trying to choose colors and what do I do. If you've got a gray you can pull in, you know, you feel like things are getting out of control, you've got too many colors, pull in a gray, or maybe pull in some yellow greens, some muted yellow greens. I think those can help. Yeah, I pulled in some muted greens here. I pulled in a lot of warm gray. These little rainbows, though, they don't work. I think it would have been better without. But again, that's just a personal, right? It's a personal preference. Including white elements. I recently did, not that one, is it this one? Yeah. So I recently did this and I showed it on a completed pages video. I'm not super happy with it, but I think it would have been worse if I had tried to make these little small flowers another color. So I've got this kind of blue-green background. I've got yellow-green for the leaves. I've got a peachy color kind of for these roses. And then like a red-violet for the foxgloves. And I feel like, then there's also the black outlining, which we won't talk about. But I feel like this is teetering on the edge of not working. And maybe even slightly crossed over, but it's definitely teetering on the edge of not working. And partly I think it's this combination of the red violet and the peach. But I think had I chosen to not make these flowers white, I think it would have pushed it over the edge. So don't discount either leaving certain elements, just leaving them white. These ones I actually colored over with a white gel pen just because I wanted them like white. But just leaving, you know, certain elements on the page. Again, if I was coloring this, I'm like, okay, you know, so I've colored these flowers and I've colored these and I've colored the leaves and the background's done. What color do I make these flowers? You know, in this case, gray maybe isn't a great option. You know, you don't often have gray flowers. You can't really make them yellow-green because all my leaves are yellow-green. White. Now, I know white isn't really a color, but that's another choice. So if you've got a lot of stuff going on, you feel like it's on the verge of kind of veering out of control, too many colors, I don't know, don't discount white, right? Gray, yellow-green, white. I think those are 3 colors that can really help to save pictures if you feel like they're you know, on the verge of just kind of color-wise veering out of control. This is an interesting example, I think. This is what I did, and I did it a couple months ago. I was doing actually have a video on how to do this background. This is the very first time I used oil pastels, and I did it on camera. I don't know why, I just did. I did the background on this first, and I meant to make it look like it was like the gold-veined marble, but I don't know that that's actually what it ended up looking like. A lot of people said it looks like the bird is flying over like the ocean and it's like a thunderstorm. You know what? Whatever it looks like, that's okay. But you'll notice the bird is really bright primary kind of colors, primary and secondary. There's yellow, there's orange, there's red in there. But the background, even though I think it's vibrant, it's cool. And so, and I didn't try, there's a lot of repeated colors. I basically chose, I think, 3, maybe 4 of the kind of yellow, orange, red pit pens. And it's just repeated colors. Even in all these little details in here, repeated. I didn't try and bring in new colors, because these bright colors, if I did that and all these little elements are all different colors coming in, it's just, again, it's too hard to look at. A little bit of muted yellow-green in there. I think muted yellow-green is a place for your eye to rest, too. And I think, again, it's because a lot of nature foliage is that muted kind of olivey yellow-green color. Maybe it harkens back to ancient ancestors of ours, I don't know, but it's looking at that color. I mean, even thinking back from a anthropological standpoint, if you're a hunter-gatherer, if you're gathering, yeah, you got to look for, the different plants, but if you're hunting, often all of yellow-green things aren't going to attack you. Do you know what I mean? Like, the foliage in the surrounding, forest isn't going to attack you and eat you. Other things might. So maybe our human brains, our really ancient human brains, have evolved to just see green or that yellow-green color as safe. I don't know. But, if you can, again, add a little bits of that in, it can help to not make other colors quite so overwhelming, if that makes sense. This is an example of, again, there's a lot of what not, maybe not what to do, but what I would change looking back. And I don't know that any of these pictures, that I hate them so much I would get rid of them. It's just looking back, as I color more and more and more, what would I change? On this one, can you think what I would change? Or what? Now again, you might be looking at this thinking it looks great, I wouldn't change anything. And that's white flower, right? Because I had some purple, I had some pink, some paler versions up here. What do I do with this? Do I introduce another color? I had blue in the bottle. I had my yellow-green for my leaves, so I left it white. I did a little bit of gray just to make some shading in there. And then I had my bees, which were going to be yellow and black. The one thing I would change if I was going to do this again, I would take that butterfly out. If I get my hand around the edge, but if I take that out, to me that looks much more cohesive. Put it back in. See that? Now, I mean, it's a standout thing. I just think it makes the page too busy. My eye doesn't know it goes there, but then it goes down here and it just doesn't know where to go. I think without that, I would have liked this much better. So yeah, including white elements, the yellow, green, gray. I think in terms of going back to, what happened to my, there. In terms of sort of our color families here, or our color, not really families, but categories. In terms of being the most forgiving, in other words, you start working with them on a page, and maybe you've got a little bit too many colors, and they're a little bit too bright. I think the most forgiving of these color categories is probably this one, the tertiary colors. Primary colors I find are really, really hard to make work. No matter what I've done when I've used primary colors, or even just primary and secondary colors, when I've used these, I find it looks childish. Now, maybe that's if that's a look you're going for, perfect, go for it. It looks jarring. It looks, well, when I've done it, it looks garish. I just don't have the skill set to make those primary and secondary colors work yet. I'm working towards it. Maybe tiny pops of them. Like in that Joanna Basford page that was kind of all cool, kind of violets and blues and yellow greens. And then I had the bright yellow sunflower and the yellow and orange butterfly. Little tiny bits of it. The rest very, very cool and muted. But more than that, and that's why I say these are really hard colors, I find, to control and to balance. And what by balance, that's what I mean. Going back to that Joanna Basford page, you know, in terms of, what did I do with that book? Where did I put it? Where did I put? Oh, there it is. This is not balanced. It's got too many colors. Balance, I think, has to do with that concept of having somewhere for your eye to rest. If your eye has nowhere to rest, to me that feels unbalanced. Here, I feel like my eye has somewhere, it's immediately drawn to here or here, but it can rest there and then take a look at the rest of this. So, and once I start to look here, it can, you know, we've got all this lovely yellow-green. It's very safe. It's very non-threatening. None of this foliage is going to jump out and attack me. And so, yeah, but on here I've got primary and secondary, probably closer to secondary, because I don't think that's true yellow. That's more of a yellow-orange. But even there, this might even be getting into some of, well, yeah, actually yellow-orange is a tertiary, isn't it? Amber, right? Yellow-orange. Some, I would say, orange in there. But, yeah, so I would say your tertiary colors are going to be more forgiving in terms of if you've got too many of them, it'll probably still be okay. Whereas if you've got lots of different primary and secondary colors going on in a page, that's going to be really hard to control. It's going to be really hard to, to make balance. And it's funny, for the amount of landscapes and everything else that I color, my greens, my true greens, are rarely ever used. You'd think, people, somebody might say, well, yeah, I go through a lot of greens. And I do. I go through a lot of greens. But not these greens. These greens. These greens. Right? Blue greens. Yellow greens. Of these Pitt pens, these Stettler pens that I use all the time, rarely ever use these. I don't think I've ever had to replace any of these colors. Still using the original pens. Probably not those either. I think I'm on my third May Green, this May Green color in the Pitt pens. Use that color all the time. This Willow Green in the Stettler, I'm on my second or third of those. What's this one called? I think this is called Olive Green. I think I'm on my second of those. This kind of grayed out, the earthy greens down here, use those a ton. So I would say from there to there, those are the greens that I use, not these. I rarely ever use those. This is, I think, a really good example of why true green doesn't often work. Or maybe I'm just, I keep saying this, but I really want to emphasize this fact. I'm not a good enough colorist, I'm not a good enough artist to make true green work. I'm hoping one day to be, but I'm not now. This does not work. And at the time I wasn't really caring too much. I was trying to, this is a strange book. It's got, you can see that, there's like a plasticky coating on certain areas. It's like been pre-glittered, and then you're just supposed to color over top of it. You see that? Certain areas flash and certain areas don't. And I was just trying to use different colors of Pitt pens and Stettler pens just to see what they would do on this plasticky coating. And because I never use those greens, I decided, well, I will use these true greens. And they do not work. Maybe they would have worked if I just would have stuck with a green color palette, like maybe some yellow greens, which is what I have out here, and some true greens, and then maybe some blue greens, like just done that analogous, the three close to each other on the color wheel. But the fact that I then stuck in orange and pink and it just does not work. But yeah, I think I might have even been able to have saved this had I made all of these leaves the same yellow greens. That might have been okay. but by introducing those true greens in there, it's just yucky. But yeah, so to me, there's an example. Those true greens are really hard. They're really hard to get to work in a picture. Now, once you get more experience, and again, if you want to throw all these tips out the window and do whatever you want to do, I love it. I love it, because being brave is part of it. But, you know, if you're looking at your coloring and you're just not happy with what you're seeing, that's kind of what these tips are for. So yeah, these colors are going to be more forgiving. These ones are going to be much harder to control, to balance, those kinds of things. Just a few more tips here. And I think I mentioned this before. If there's lots of small elements, limit your color palette. And I will show you 2 examples. And it's funny because one I colored after the other, and it's the first one that I did that I think that turned out better. So this is in Joanna's Christmas, and I colored this, was it last year? Year before. I think I started it the year before and maybe finished it last year. So we've got this Christmas picture, and I mean there's tons of tiny little things in here. But I kept a very, very, well, as limited as I could. In fact, I'm looking at it now, I probably could have gone more limited color palette. I mean, it's very traditional Christmas, right? It's very red and green. The background is a very pale blue. There's a lot of white elements that I kept in here. Black is another great color that you can put in if you're unsure, you know, you need another color, but black is hard. If you get too much of it, that can become overwhelming too. There's definitely some brighter greens in here. These poinsettias were I think those were the first things I colored on this, maybe even a couple years ago. I would use a different green for those leaves now. Notice the rest of the leaves and stuff are different. These are closer to a true green. These are more the earthier greens, but oh well. A little bit of brown, but overall, there's a lot of tiny elements on here, but a lot of repeated colors. And I think when you've got a lot of tiny elements, repeated colors are going to be your best friend. Here's what I did more recently where I should have listened to my own advice. So you guys might remember this. This was not very long ago. And there was a whole saga with this one too. But I've got all these tiny elements, and there were just colors going everywhere. I mean, there is a lot of gray in these elements because it was, you know, like microscopes and things like that. But I've got like a bright primary orange, or secondary technically, orange going on in here, and some bright primary yellows, and then pinks and blues, and then teals, and some more bright oranges, and there's too many elements. And then not on top of that, I decided to do a fancy background, which doesn't work either. And blues, and then there's greens, and it just doesn't work. I should have kept a much, much simpler choice of colors. I should not have outlined everything, and I should not have had a fancy background, because the background introduced yet more colors, right? You've got this blue here that isn't in any, it's almost like an aqua-y blue in the back. The green down here is I think okay, but yeah, I should have listened to my own advice. I should have listened to my own advice. In terms of black being effective, I mentioned that black is another good choice for elements where, you know, you want to bring in another color, but you don't want it to be a color. It can be effective, but it can be overwhelming. It's probably best to use it in small areas. And I think this is maybe a good example. So I'm really proud of this. This is in a mandala book. And this is something that I did kind of winter of 2023. So I don't remember, January, February, somewhere in there. And I really do love coloring mandalas. Mandalas are a great way to try color choices, to see what works, what doesn't work. But I also wanted to see if I could make a mandala into something other than a mandala. And this was a wonderful viewer gave me a suggestion. Or no, I think my original idea was, maybe it came from Karen at My Colorful Country Life. She had done like a tree stencil on, it was Joanna Basford page. So then I thought, well, what if I make it so that, no, it was a viewer too, that had suggested making the snowflake mandala almost like it's rising, like a moon or something like that. And then I just sort of ran with it. So I've got color on here in that I've got color with the sun setting kind of color. So I've got my oranges and yellows, and then goes into kind of blues and out into black, dark blue up here. And then I've got a little bit of yellow on the lanterns here. But I've got, little mice that I stamped. These are Lavinia stamps. The trees were a stencil. The trees are just black. I didn't color them a color, right? Because I thought that would make them effective against this kind of colorful background. And the same thing with the mice. I could have colored them mouse colored, but silhouetted black, I think that's kind of effective. So, sorry, it's maybe hard to focus. Take that, just so you're not looking at that color too. But yeah, I think this is a time where, and maybe it's too much black, I don't know, but I do have the bright colors. I've got the white and the kind of silver of the snowflake in the background. I've got white snow down here. So yeah, black can be a good color choice. I think that works sometimes. So I think I will try and put on the screen now at the end, and I'll also put in the description box down below just some of the tips that I talked about. So the first one, I still think color choice and color balance is more important than shading. We worry so much about where to put the shadows and the highlights. Flat coloring can be super, super impressive if you get your color choices right. In terms of color choices, some people are born with an artistic eye. I was not, but you can learn, right? It's just going to take more work. Bright primary and secondary colors are harder to control and harder to balance. Start out maybe with more muted tertiary colors. They're going to be more forgiving. If you're really struggling with getting your pages to look the way you want, try some of those more muted tertiary colors. The more colors you use, the harder it is to control and balance them. So try, maybe just 3 colors or 3 or 4 colors on a page. You can use lighter or darker versions of those colors, but just 3 or 4 colors, and see if that helps. Gray, whether it be warm gray, French gray, I don't often choose cool gray, but you could, is a great color choice if you need another color, but you don't want to introduce another, actual color. Try using a warm gray or a French gray instead for some elements. Yellow-green is also a great choice to bring in. It doesn't clash with much except for kind of a true green. I know they're side by side on the color wheel, but and that goes to one of the other tips that I gave. True green, the true green family, is a really hard color family to work into stuff. It just is. Yellow-green, I think, is a much, much better choice. White elements. White is another color. It's not a color, but that's great to bring in if you need something else. You've got elements and you think, well, they need to be different than these other elements, different color. What other color should they be? Rather than bringing in another color, consider leaving them white. And put a little tiny bit of gray shading or really pale blue shading on them, just to, if you want to put some shadows in. Again, we're just talking about flat coloring, but if you want to do that, you could. But yeah, consider leaving things white. It really does give, again, places for your eye to rest. Yeah, and again, I realize not all tertiary colors are grayed out and muted. That's sort of two different, I'm sort of talking about them as though they're the same. Tertiary colors are, these colors. These are not grayed out and muted. These are, I think, the most forgiving. This tends to be the most forgiving category of colors. I think an even more forgiving category is taking these colors but making really grayed out muted versions, or even grayed out muted versions of the primary or secondary colors. So rather than, blue, what about a gray blue? Or rather than red, what about, I was going to say like a gray red or an earth red, like an ochre color, like a brown red? Or instead of yellow, what if you went with like an ochre? If you get into more of those muted, earthy versions, I think those are going to be more forgiving too. So, I have these. You buy sets of pencils or you buy sets of markers, and of course you've got all these, primary colors, the secondary colors, and then you've got, the tertiary and so on. The primaries and secondaries in a lot of my sets don't get used very often, and that could be because I am not an artist. And I'm sure if I had gone to art school, I would have been taught how to use these effectively. And as I keep learning, I'm sure that I will probably find ways where I can use these effectively. But as a beginning colorist, and again, this is more aimed for those that are, you're struggling, right? You're looking at the stuff that you're coloring and you're thinking, I just don't like it. There's something, that's more who I'm sort of talking to. I'm not talking to experienced artists. I'm not, you guys know what, you are far better at this than I am. But because I'm a beginner and I struggle with this stuff, these are just some tips. That's really what it comes down to. But, back to my color cards here for my Pitt pens. Rarely ever. I mean, they come with the set, but, a lot of these, that is more likely I might use. That's almost a little bit more of an earthier red. Bright pinks, yeah, not often. These blues, rarely ever. These greens, nope. Those more so. That color, no. Yes, down in here. There's the reds that I would use. There's the oranges I would use, right? This terracotta orange. I just find that kind of color palette far more forgiving. So if I do end up with too many colors, or I do end up with, rather than keeping everything sort of kind of the same shades and just having pops of a different color. And Jennifer Stay, again, I mentioned her at the beginning of the video. She has some wonderful, wonderful resources on how to properly use her color picker, because she talks about, say you're choosing a red-violet color scheme, and say you've got one of these ones down here with 4 colors. You've got blue, green, red, violet, red, orange, and yellow, green. Those are all tertiary colors. But if you want a page to look balanced, you're not going to basically have a quarter of the elements on the page this color, and a quarter of the elements on the page this color, and a quarter this color, and a quarter this color. That's not going to look good. She talks about using a mother color. So one of these, maybe it's your red violet, that's going to be most of your elements. And then you're going to have some that are blue-green, some that are yellow-green, and just a hint of red-orange. So that's what I mean by balance too. So yeah, there's some just really great, I'm going to leave this right here, because I honestly think even getting the version that you print yourself, because I know getting the print version from Jennifer and Steve, because they ship from their own print shop, which I think is fantastic, but it can be kind of pricey if you're not in the US. So buying the PDF version and then printing it yourself, great thing to do. But yeah, taking a look at some of the stuff that other folks have put out on color picking, color balancing. I hope some of this stuff is helpful. Like I say, I'm not saying that shading and what have you is not important because I think it is. But I do honestly think that choosing your colors is maybe more important. Choosing them well, balancing them well, I think maybe is more important. Because I think you can have, you can spend hours and hours and hours with shading and making sure your shading and your blends are all perfect. But if your color choices are jarring, I don't think anyone's going to notice that shading, right? That's what I'm finding for my own coloring. If my color choices are bad, I can do the best shadowing and highlighting and everything, but no one's going to notice. No one's going to say that looks really good because my color choices just don't work. I forgot to talk about the last tip that I had added in there, which was that black is another good color choice for elements on your page where you need another color, but you don't want to bring in another color. Although I will say it's best to use black sparingly, or it can kind of overwhelm the rest of your page. So I don't know if this video was rambly. Well, I definitely was rambly. I don't know if it was helpful. It's just some things that I've been thinking about in terms of my own coloring. Yeah, like I say, not aimed at those of you out there who are experts and who don't struggle with this kind of thing, because I have seen amazing colorists make just this work, but that's hard. So, you know, as a beginner or someone who struggles trying to make this work, you're making your job so much harder than it needs to be. You know, rather than this, do this. I think this is going to work more easily than that. Or say that is going to work more easily than this or this. If you like what you see, although I don't know that this video was the best thing for that, it was kind of rambling, consider subscribing to my channel, liking the video, hitting the notification bell, leaving me a comment. Although, make sure it's nice and make sure you can disagree with me, but just be polite. Letting a friend know that you found a channel that you like and they might like it too. I hope everyone is safe. I hope everyone is well. I hope everyone is enjoying their coloring, no matter what you do. If you want to just go crazy and ignore, sorry, that sounds bad. If you want to ignore everything I've said in this video, you go for it. Because like I say, this is just me. This is just what I've found over the time I've been coloring. That's it for today, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.